I never in a million years thought the person pushing open the heavy, soundproof door of the basement recording studio at 2 in the morning would be Arthur. But before I get into the absolute chaos that ruined my sanity and permanently changed my life, do me a huge favor and drop your city or country in the comments down below. It helps the channel out a lot, and I love seeing exactly where in the world you guys are listening from. Okay, back to the night my entire reality completely shattered. The reason I didn't expect Arthur wasn't because he was a stranger. Far from it. Arthur was the older brother of Sam, my best friend and the lead singer of our completely broke, struggling indie rock band. Arthur was an established, highly respected music producer who occasionally let us use his secondary studio space for free out of pity. He was 30, intimidatingly composed, and moved through the world with this quiet, heavy authority that made people stop talking when he entered a room. I was 22, a perpetually stressed guitarist who survived on cheap coffee and anxiety. The reason I didn't expect him was because the studio was supposed to be empty until morning, the air conditioning was completely broken, and I was doing something incredibly humiliating when that heavy metal door clicked open. I had just spent 3 hours violently struggling with a complex solo. The tiny vocal booth was a suffocating sauna. I had stripped off my soaked t-shirt, tossing it over a microphone stand, and was standing there in nothing but worn-out denim jeans, sweat dripping down my chest, intensely mimicking a ridiculous rock star pose in the reflection of the observation glass, while silently mouthing the words to a song we hadn't even finished writing. I thought I was entirely alone. Then the latch clicked. I froze. The heavy door swung open, and Arthur stopped dead in the threshold. For an agonizing, endless 5 seconds, the absolute silence in the room was deafening. Neither of us inhaled. His dark eyes slowly dragged all the way down my bare chest, tracing the line of my stomach, before snapping back up to my face. The look in his eyes was not casual. It wasn't his usual bored, producer expression. It was entirely unreadable, dark, and intensely focused. "Oh," Arthur said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the small space. I lunged backward, violently grabbing my damp t-shirt off the mic stand and dragging it over my head so fast I nearly choked myself on the collar. "Jesus, Arthur, ever heard of knocking?" I practically shouted, my voice cracking humiliatingly. Arthur didn't move. He just leaned his broad shoulder against the heavy doorframe, making the room feel infinitely smaller. He was wearing a dark, tailored button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, exposing the intricate black ink of his tattoos. He looked entirely unaffected by the fact that my brain was currently flatlining. "I didn't realize you were hosting a private, unplugged performance in the dark, Leo," he said slowly. "Get out," I snapped, aggressively twisting the tuning pegs on my acoustic guitar to give my trembling hands something to do. But he didn't leave. He simply stood there, his large hand resting casually on the brass doorknob, watching me with a heavy, calculating stare. Arthur was usually strictly professional with me, always focused on the mixing board or lecturing Sam about our terrible time management. Now he looked completely distracted. "Are you all right?" I asked cautiously, hating how breathless I sounded. His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before he gave a slow, lazy shrug. "Fine." Another massive wall of silence stretched between us. The broken air conditioner rattled weakly in the corner. I became painfully aware of the sharp scent of his expensive cedar cologne, cutting through the stale, dusty air of the studio. Arthur had always been deeply attractive. It was an objective fact that everyone in our local music scene acknowledged. He had this dark, effortlessly authoritative presence that made people desperate for his approval, including me, especially me, which was a massive, catastrophic problem I had spent the last 3 years burying under a mountain of guitar riffs and denial. "You can leave now, I'm done rehearsing," I muttered, staring intensely at the floorboards. A dark smirk played at the corner of his mouth. "You seem nervous, Leo." "I am not nervous. You're just acting weird." "I'm acting weird?" Yes, I insisted, my fingers gripping the neck of my guitar so hard my knuckles turned white. He let out a low, rough laugh. Then, instead of stepping back into the hallway, he stepped fully into the studio and let the heavy door click shut behind him. The lock engaging sounded like a gunshot. Every single muscle in my shoulders locked tight. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave in sheer panic. "Relax," Arthur said, his boots walking softly across the scuffed hardwood floor. "Sam is upstairs in the main house, passed out on the couch. He asked me to check if you locked up the expensive gear." "So, the gear is fine. I'm locking up." "So, I'm down here now," he said, his voice dropping slightly on the last word. I swallowed hard, my throat sandpaper dry. A sudden thick tension flooded the small room, entirely erasing the familiar comfort of the studio. Or maybe the tension had always been there, vibrating quietly beneath every interaction we ever had, and I had just become an expert at pretending it was background noise. Arthur walked closer, casually inspecting the messy cables on the floor, while I stood frozen against the amplifier. My pulse was hammering frantically against my ribs. "You've changed the pedal board setup," he observed smoothly. "Not really. We just rewired the delay pedal. You've grown up since the last time I really listened to you play." He turned his head and looked directly into my eyes. "Haven't you?" Something about the dark, low timbre of his voice made my stomach drop into a bottomless pit. I crossed my arms defensively over my chest. "What is your actual problem tonight, Arthur?" "I don't have a problem." "Then why are you staring at me like I owe you money?" His eyes locked onto mine and refused to let go. The oxygen in the room felt incredibly thin. Arthur took another slow step toward me. He moved deliberately, giving me plenty of time to step away. I didn't move an inch. "You genuinely don't know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My chest constricted. "Know what?" But the truth was, I couldn't force the words out, because beneath the panic, a terrifying, suppressed part of my brain knew exactly what this heavy, suffocating atmosphere meant, and it terrified me to my core. Arthur was untouchable. He was a professional, an older mentor figure, and presumably entirely straight. He was the kind of man you admired from a safe distance and eventually forced yourself to get over. Except I had never even come close to getting over him. "You should probably go back upstairs," I finally forced out, though my voice sounded pathetic and shaky. Arthur tilted his head slightly, studying my face like a complex sheet of music. "You want me to leave?" "Yes." A long pause hung in the air. "Are you absolutely sure about that?" The specific, dark way he asked that question made my knees feel weak. I looked away first, staring at the scuffed toe of my sneaker. "Arthur, please." He stepped closer again. The physical heat radiating off his body was undeniable now. I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his sharp jawline. "You have been acting completely erratic around me for the last 6 months, Leo," he said quietly. "I have not. You refuse to hold eye contact with me during meetings. That is a lie. Your face turns entirely red whenever I correct your fingering on the fretboard. That is absolutely not true." Arthur smirked, a devastatingly confident expression. "Leo, your neck is flushed right now." Damn it. I hated his observational skills. I hated that my nervous system betrayed me so easily around him. He suddenly reached his large hand out toward my face. My breath caught sharply in my throat, my eyes widening, but he bypassed me entirely, grabbing my phone off the amplifier behind my back. His solid forearm brushed firmly against my waist in the process, sending a violent shock wave of electricity straight through my spine. He glanced at the illuminated screen. "You listen to acoustic breakup playlists while sweating in the dark?" he asked smoothly. I snatched the device from his grip immediately. "Why are you invading my personal property?" "Because watching you lose your mind is remarkably entertaining." I rubbed my temples, desperately trying to slow my racing heart. "You are infuriating." "And you are terrified." "I am not terrified." then look me in the eyes. I did. It was a catastrophic mistake. Arthur was staring down at me with an intensity that burned. He looked like a man who had finally stopped pretending. And for the very first time since I met him, a terrifying thought sparked in my mind. What if this agonizing secret wasn't actually one-sided? I did not sleep a single minute that night. Arthur eventually stepped back, told me to lock the deadbolt, and walked out of the studio with his usual calm, collected stride, leaving me standing alone in the quiet basement, desperately trying to remember the mechanics of human breathing. The absolute worst part of the encounter was that he hadn't done anything tangible. There was no confession, no physical line crossed, just heavy words and a stare that completely unraveled my sanity. The next afternoon, our band had a mandatory rehearsal. I dragged myself into the studio, clutching a massive thermos of black coffee, praying the bizarre energy from the night before was a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. Maybe Arthur was just a naturally intense person who enjoyed messing with his younger brother's anxious bandmates. That fragile theory evaporated the second I walked through the door. "Afternoon, Leo," Arthur's deep voice called out. I looked up and instantly regretted it. Arthur was sitting at the massive mixing console, wearing a plain black t-shirt that stretched tightly across his broad shoulders, holding a clipboard. Sam, my oblivious best friend and lead singer, was aggressively untangling a microphone cable on the floor nearby. "Hey," I mumbled, immediately walking to the far corner of the room to unpack my guitar. I could feel Arthur's heavy gaze following every single movement I made. It was a physical sensation, prickly and warm against my skin. It made me hyper-aware of everything. How I unlatched the guitar case, how I plugged the thick cable into the amp, how I pushed my messy hair out of my eyes. I felt entirely ridiculous and exposed. "Are we still doing that gear pickup at the downtown shop later?" Sam asked loudly, tossing the cable aside. "I can't drive, my engine is making that screaming noise again." Arthur spoke without looking away from me. "I'll drive. Leo needs to come to approve the new amp heads anyway." I snapped my head up. "I can take the bus." A faint, knowing smile touched Arthur's lips. "It's raining, Leo. Don't be dramatic. I'll take you." Sam groaned from the floor. "Can you two stop the weird glaring contest? We have a set list to finish." I nearly dropped my guitar pick. Arthur just chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that made my chest tight. "I'm perfectly calm, Sam. Leo just gets a little intimidated around me." "Oh my God," I breathed out, mortified. Sam laughed loudly. "Honestly, it's true. Leo used to literally hide in the bathroom when you came over to check on our rehearsals 2 years ago." I stared at my supposed best friend with absolute betrayal. I was resting my vocal cords. "You were hiding because you said he looked like a mafia hitman," Sam shot back happily. Arthur looked deeply amused by this historical revelation. "That explains a remarkable amount," he murmured, his dark eyes sparkling with something dangerous as he watched me blush furiously. The rehearsal was pure torture. Every time I looked up from my fretboard, Arthur was watching me from the producer's chair. Not watching the band, watching me. 2 hours later, I found myself trapped in the passenger seat of Arthur's pristine, expensive SUV. Sam had stayed behind to write lyrics, leaving us entirely alone. The rain was coming down hard, drumming a steady, heavy rhythm against the roof. The silence in the car was thick, suffocating, and charged with an energy that felt incredibly dangerous. I kept my face turned strictly toward the passenger window, watching the blurred city lights, terrified that if I looked at him, I would spontaneously combust. The heavy traffic forced us to a crawl. "You're pressing yourself against that door so hard you're going to break the handle," Arthur said quietly, his voice cutting through the soft hum of the radio. I stiffened. "I'm just giving you space to drive." "In a luxury SUV with a massive center console?" he asked dryly. I didn't answer. The rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers felt incredibly loud. Suddenly, traffic came to a complete halt at a red light. Arthur shifted in his seat, turning his large body slightly toward me. His arms stretched across the wide console, his long fingers resting dangerously close to my leg. Are you going to ignore me for the rest of your life, Leo? I'm not ignoring you. I'm focusing on the road. You don't have a steering wheel. Arthur, please, I whispered, my voice sounding incredibly frail. Please what? He pushed softly. Please stop looking at me like that. Like what? Like you're trying to dissect my brain. Arthur let out a slow, measured breath. The light turned green, and he accelerated smoothly, but his hand didn't move away from the console. In fact, his fingers lightly brushed against the worn denim covering my knee. I stopped breathing. A violent jolt of electricity shot straight up my thigh. He didn't pull away. He just left his hand there, barely touching me, but dominating my entire nervous system. You know, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate murmur. I've spent a very long time trying to figure you out. You act completely terrified whenever I enter a room, but then, when you think I'm not looking, you look at me like you want me to do something about it. The heat rushed into my face so fast it actually stung. I do not. You absolutely do. You're completely delusional, I shot back, though my voice was trembling. He merged into the next lane, his thumb lazily tracing a microscopic circle against the fabric of my jeans. Then tell me to move my hand, Leo. I stared out the window, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I should have told him to stop. Any rational person would have shouted at him to pull over. But I couldn't speak. I sat there, completely paralyzed, letting his warmth burn through my jeans, admitting silent defeat. You're not saying it, he noted softly, a strange note of relief in his heavy voice. I squeezed my eyes shut. Why are you doing this now? I asked, my voice barely audible over the rain. He was quiet for a long time. The neon signs of the city washed over his sharp profile in flashes of red and gold. Because, he finally said, his tone stripped of all its usual arrogance, sounding shockingly raw. I got entirely exhausted of pretending I didn't want to. The weight of that confession hit me like a physical blow. Arthur didn't hesitate. He didn't show weakness. But sitting here in the dark, rain-slicked car, he sounded vulnerable. That terrified me more than anything else. The rest of the week was an agonizing blur of unspoken tension. Arthur didn't push again, but the invisible string pulled taut between us was constantly humming. It all culminated on Friday night at our biggest gig of the year. We were playing at an underground, suffocatingly packed indie venue downtown. The bass from the main speakers was shaking the concrete floor. The air was thick with the smell of spilled beer, sweat, and cheap smoke. Normally, the adrenaline of performing erased all my anxiety. Tonight, it just amplified it. Because Arthur was standing at the very back of the dark room, leaning against a brick pillar, his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't watching the crowd. He wasn't talking to the sound guy. He was watching me. During the final song, I closed my eyes and poured every ounce of frustration, confusion, and suppressed desire into the strings. When the final chord rang out and the crowd roared, I opened my eyes. Arthur was already walking toward the back exit. The second we walked off stage, I handed my guitar to Sam without a word and pushed my way through the suffocating crowd, desperate for cold air. I shoved open the heavy metal fire exit door and stumbled out into the dark, narrow alleyway behind the club. The cold night air hit my lungs like ice. I leaned against the damp brick wall, tipping my head back and dragging in deep, desperate breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. The heavy door groaned open again. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The sharp scent of cedar and the heavy, deliberate footsteps told me everything. You played well, Arthur's voice came from the shadows. I opened my eyes. He was standing just a few feet away, illuminated by the sickly yellow glow of a single street lamp. He was wearing a dark leather jacket, looking dangerously out of place in the grimy alleyway. Thanks, I muttered, staring at the wet pavement. Arthur stepped closer, his heavy boots splashing quietly in a shallow puddle. The distant, muffled thud of the bass from inside the club vibrated against the bricks. You practically sprinted off the stage. Are you running away again? I needed air, Arthur. It's 1,000,000 degrees in there. He stepped closer again. The alleyway suddenly felt suffocatingly narrow. Are you afraid of being alone with me, Leo? He asked, his voice a low, rough vibration that settled deep in my stomach. No. Liar. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look up at him. The dim light cast sharp shadows across his face. He looked incredibly serious. The teasing edge was completely gone. What exactly do you want from me? I whispered, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. Arthur didn't answer immediately. He took the final step, completely erasing the distance between us. I was trapped between the cold brick wall and the overwhelming heat of his body. You've had a massive crush on me since the day we met, haven't you? He stated quietly, stating it as an absolute, undeniable fact. My entire nervous system shut down. I froze, staring at him in sheer, unadulterated horror. He said it with such quiet certainty. I, you, I stammered pathetically. You don't have to deny it, Leo. The humiliation burned hot in my chest. Is it really that obvious? I choked out, hiding my face in my hands. To me, yes. I groaned, the sound echoing miserably in the narrow space. This is a nightmare. This is entirely humiliating. Strong, warm hands gently gripped my wrists, pulling my hands away from my face. I looked up, terrified, but Arthur's dark eyes were incredibly soft. No one is mocking you, Leo, he said softly. The absolute sincerity in his voice made my chest crack open. He looked careful. He looked like he was handling something fragile. I never meant for you to find out, I admitted, my voice cracking. I know. You aren't entirely disgusted by this? I asked, my heart hammering violently. Arthur let go of my wrists and slowly moved his hands to rest firmly on my waist. The contact sent a blinding rush of heat straight through my blood. No, he murmured, his thumbs lightly brushing against my hips. I am definitely not disgusted. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. Then why are you torturing me like this? I whispered, looking up at his mouth. Arthur stared down at me for a long, agonizing second. Because, he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, desperate whisper. Every single time you look at me like that, I have to fight the overwhelming urge to pull you against a wall and kiss you until you forget your own name. The entire world stopped spinning. The music from the club faded into absolute silence. I just stared at him, certain my brain had finally snapped. Arthur watched my face carefully, like he was waiting for me to violently push him away or scream for help. When I didn't move, when I just stood there trembling in his grip, he let out a harsh, unsteady breath. Tell me to stop, Leo. Seriously. Tell me to back off right now. I couldn't. I had spent 3 agonizing years fighting this exact feeling. I didn't know who moved the final inch. One second we were staring at each other in the dark, and the next, his heavy hands gripped my waist, pulling me hard against his chest. My brain completely short-circuited. My breath hitched violently as his mouth finally came down on mine. It wasn't rushed or forceful. It was incredibly slow, deliberate, and devastatingly gentle. He kissed me like he had been starving for it, testing my reaction, waiting to see if I would run. I didn't run. The second his lips pressed against mine, my hands moved entirely on instinct, grabbing the heavy lapels of his leather jacket and pulling him closer. Arthur let out a low, rough groan against my mouth, a sound that sent a shockwave of pure electricity down my spine. He shifted his grip, one arm wrapping securely around my lower back, the other hand sliding up to cradle the back of my neck, tangling his fingers in my messy hair. He kissed me deeper, opening my mouth, pouring years of unspoken tension into a single, overwhelming moment. My heart was beating so violently I thought my ribs would fracture. All the years of pretending, all the anxiety, completely evaporated under the heavy warmth of his mouth. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathing heavily, our foreheads resting against each other in the dark alleyway. My hands were still fiercely gripping his jacket. Neither of us spoke. The muffled bass drum from the club kept beating against the walls. "You have absolutely no idea," Arthur murmured, his voice incredibly rough, "how long I have wanted to do exactly that." I stared into his dark eyes, utterly bewildered. "You're completely serious." He let out a breathless, quiet laugh. "Leo, I have been losing my mind over you for over a year." The confession made my chest ache in the best possible way. The untouchable, arrogant producer was standing in a dirty alleyway, admitting he was just as terrified as I was. "Why didn't you say anything?" I whispered. Arthur stepped back slightly, running a hand through his dark hair, looking deeply frustrated with himself. "Because you're my little brother's best friend. Because you're 22. Because every time I walked into a room, you looked like a terrified deer." I spent 12 months actively trying to convince myself I didn't want you. That hit me incredibly hard. "Did it work?" I asked softly. A slow, devastating smile spread across his face. "Not even a little bit." He reached out, gently wiping a drop of rain off my cheek with his thumb. The intimate gesture made my stomach flip violently. "We need to get out of here," he said quietly. "My car is out front." "What about Sam? We have to load the gear." "Sam is currently drinking his weight in cheap beer at the bar. He won't notice we're gone for hours. I'll text him that I took you home because you had a migraine." I couldn't stop the small laugh that escaped my throat. "You are an incredibly convincing liar." "I'm a professional problem solver. Let's go." The drive back to the band's cramped, messy apartment was completely different from the agonizing ride a few days prior. The tension was still there, but it wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was electric. We didn't talk much. Arthur drove with one hand casually resting on the steering wheel, his other hand resting firmly on my knee the entire time. The warmth of his palm radiated through my jeans, anchoring me to a reality I still couldn't quite believe was happening. When we finally unlocked the door to the apartment, the place was completely dark and blissfully quiet. We stepped inside, the heavy door clicking shut behind us, plunging us into the dim light of the street lamp filtering through the kitchen window. I dropped my keys on the counter, my hands trembling slightly. Now that we were entirely alone, in my personal space, the overwhelming magnitude of the situation hit me. I walked to the kitchen sink, pouring a glass of water just to give my shaking hands a task. Arthur leaned against the kitchen island, his tall frame taking up an unfair amount of space in the small room. He watched me intensely. "You're shaking again," he noted, his voice low in the quiet apartment. "I am just processing," I admitted, gripping the edge of the cheap Formica counter. Arthur pushed off the island and slowly walked toward me. The predatory grace in his movement made my breath hitch. He stopped inches away, invading my personal space entirely. "Are you regretting it?" he asked, a sudden flash of vulnerability in his dark eyes. "No," I answered instantly. "Not at all. I'm just terrified you're going to realize this is a terrible idea tomorrow morning." Arthur reached out, his large hands cupping my face. He tilted my head up so I was forced to look directly into his eyes. "Leo, listen to me carefully. I am a 30-year-old man who does not make impulsive decisions. I know exactly what I am doing, and I know exactly what I want." He didn't give me a chance to argue. He leaned down and kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation. The kiss was deep, claiming, and fiercely possessive. He pressed me back against the kitchen counter, his body heavy and warm against mine. My hands instinctively slid up his chest, wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. The apartment was completely silent except for the heavy sound of our breathing. I felt completely anchored, entirely consumed by him. Suddenly, the loud sound of a key aggressively scraping in the front door lock echoed through the apartment. We tore apart so violently, I nearly slammed my head against the kitchen cabinets. The front door swung open, hitting the wall with a loud bang. The overhead lights flicked on, blindingly bright. Dude, the sound guy was an absolute nightmare. Sam's loud, drunk voice echoed through the hallway. He stumbled into the kitchen, dragging his heavy guitar case, and stopped dead in his tracks. My heart plummeted straight into my stomach. I was standing against the counter, breathing heavily, my face flushed bright red, my hair an absolute disaster. Arthur was standing suspiciously close to me, casually straightening the collar of his jacket, though his chest was heaving slightly. Sam blinked. He looked at me. He looked at his older brother. He looked at the non-existent space between us. A heavy, suffocating silence descended over the kitchen. "Why are you guys standing in the dark?" Sam asked slowly, his voice losing all its drunken enthusiasm. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me whole. I was entirely paralyzed. Arthur, however, remained infuriatingly calm. He leaned casually against the counter, crossing his arms. "We were just talking, Sam." "Talking," Sam repeated. His eyes narrowed, darting between my flushed face and Arthur's dark, intense expression. The cogs in his brain were visibly turning, fighting through the alcohol haze. Then, his eyes widened to comical proportions. He dropped the heavy guitar case onto the floor with a massive thud. Oh my God. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "No absolute way," Sam whispered, stepping backward like he had just seen a ghost. I closed my eyes in pure agony. "Sam, please, let me explain." "Shut up," Sam yelled, pointing a dramatic finger at me. "Do not speak." He spun to look at Arthur. "Are you out of your absolute mind? This is my guitarist. He's a child." "I am 22, I protested weakly. Arthur sighed, a long, tired sound. He ran a hand over his face. "Sam, lower your voice. You're going to wake the neighbors." "I do not care about the neighbors." Sam paced in a frantic circle, pulling at his blonde hair. "I leave you two alone for exactly 30 minutes, and I walk into whatever that was." He stopped and pointed at Arthur again. You've been complaining about him messing up chords for months." "I was deflecting," Arthur said calmly. "Deflecting?" Sam shrieked. He looked at me, his face twisted in a mixture of horror and realization. "Wait, the anxiety, the hiding in the bathroom, the fact that you threw up before our first studio session with him." I hid my burning face in my hands. "Can we please stop recounting my historical trauma?" Sam stared at us for another long, agonizing minute. The anger slowly faded from his face, replaced by a deep, profound look of older brother exhaustion. He walked over to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and took a long drink. He leaned against the fridge, looking incredibly defeated. "This is going to make band practice absolute hell," Sam muttered. A tiny spark of hope flared in my chest. "You aren't entirely furious?" I asked cautiously. Sam shot me a dark glare. "I am furious. I am disgusted. You are my best friend, and he is my terrifying older brother. I am going to require thousands of dollars in therapy to erase the image of whatever I just interrupted." He pointed a threatening finger at Arthur. "If you break his heart, or mess up his ability to play rhythm guitar, I will personally destroy your mixing boards. Am I clear?" Arthur's expression softened into something genuinely respectful. "Completely clear. I'm not going to hurt him, Sam." Sam stared at him for a few seconds, seemingly satisfied with the absolute sincerity in Arthur's voice. He sighed dramatically, grabbed his guitar case, and began trudging toward his bedroom. "I am going to sleep. I refuse to process this until tomorrow afternoon. Do not make any weird noises in the kitchen." His bedroom door slammed shut, leaving us in silence once again. I slumped back against the counter, letting out a massive, trembling breath. "I genuinely thought he was going to assault you with a microphone stand," I whispered. Arthur stepped back into my space, a soft, incredibly warm smile on his face. He reached out, gently tucking a stray piece of hair behind my ear. I told you he would get over it. You did not tell me that. You lied to him about my migraine. A minor detail, Arthur murmured, leaning in until his chest brushed against mine. Are you okay? I looked up into his dark eyes. The panic was entirely gone, replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. The secret was out. The agonizing tension was broken. The man I had spent years desperately pining over was standing in my cheap kitchen, looking at me like I was the only thing that mattered in the world. Yeah, I breathed out, a genuine smile finally breaking across my face. I'm really okay. Arthur's hand settled firmly on my hips, pulling me flush against him. Good, he whispered, right before his mouth captured mine again, effectively silencing any remaining doubts I had left in my head. So, to everyone listening to this insane confession, that is how my secret, agonizing, 3-year crush turned into the most chaotic night of my life, and eventually, a relationship. Let me know in the comments below. Do you think I should have confessed sooner, or was waiting for him to make the move the right play? If you enjoyed this completely unhinged story, please make sure to hit that subscribe button for more crazy Reddit confessions every single week. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.